Hello friends! I was thinking the other day that I have been living here in the US for almost 10 years. I first moved to California in 2008, early 2008, and then a few years later I moved out here to Connecticut. And a common question I get from my friends and viewers is, what's it like living in the US as a New Zealander? So I wanted to make a series of videos describing both my experiences and my observations, which I think will be interesting to anyone thinking of moving to the US, and also interesting to people that grew up in the US, how somebody from the outside sort of sees living here in the US. But to make it easier to watch, I thought I'd split it into categories, and today's category will be driving, obviously, I do a lot of driving here in the US, and electrical appliances and power. I know, how interesting can that be? But there's a few things I've noticed about that that's interesting as well. So let's start with driving. Naturally, you probably think that I'm going to talk about how the US is the Wild West of lane discipline on the highways, but that's true in a lot of countries, so that's no big deal. The first thing I find interesting about driving here in the US is the policing of speed limits. What am I talking about? Well, take for example a highway that's near me, which is called the Interstate 95, which runs from the top of the country to the bottom of the country. Where I live, the speed limit is 55 miles an hour, yet that speed is never policed. I drive 80 to 85 miles an hour every day on that highway and have no fear of ever getting a ticket. You can drive past a state trooper and, they're all good. I think if I was driving at 55, the speed limit, he'd probably pull me over for disrupting traffic. Yet, if I drive a few minutes south to the People's Communist Party state of New York and dare to drive just a few miles an hour over the speed limit, they'll hunt me down like the dog I am, drag me out of my car, and beat me like it's the Rodney King incident. Actually, this is true of the state above us as well, Massachusetts. There's always a swarm of mass state police vehicles waiting for some poor innocent foreign boy in his blue Porsche, low-flying into their state to swarm on me and give me a good beating. But here in Connecticut, no such problem. What they need to do is have set the speed limit and then have a little sign above it showing approximately how fast you can go above the speed limit state to state. Because here in Connecticut, in some roads, they completely forgive you for doing 30 miles an hour, which is 50 kilometers an hour, above the speed limit. The second thing is, and this is a feature I love about driving in the States, and that's the turn right on red light rule. So when you come up to an intersection, you've got a red light, unless there's a sign stating otherwise, you can still turn right like it's a yield or a give way. This keeps traffic flowing so well. I love this rule. And in some states, you can actually turn left on red if you're turning into a one-way street as well. I just don't see why everybody doesn't have this. Doesn't seem to cause any accidents. I love this feature. Another traffic signal thing that I like is traffic signals that turn into yields or give ways after a certain time of night. They just start flashing orange. This is also an awesome feature. It means that you're not stuck at lights when there's just no other cars around. Something I don't love so much is stop signs. Stop signs are everywhere in the US. I mean, the person that sells stop signs here is a very, very rich man. They just throw a stop sign wherever, on roads, on intersections, and in California, man, there's sometimes 4 lanes and all converging into each other, all with stop signs, and you have to figure out who got there first, and there could be like 8 or 10 cars all waiting, all trying to go. Stop signs are everywhere. But the biggest problem I had with learning the stop system here in the US is that stop signs, strangely, don't come with double yellow lines on the road. What am I talking about? Well, here in the US, stop signs are just a single line, white line, just like any other intersection. And when you grow up in countries where there's a double yellow line, which I think is most countries, your subconscious looks for that double yellow line on the road to indicate you've come into a stop. You don't actually look for the sign. So I had to retrain myself to look for the sign instead of looking for that double yellow line. You don't realize until you start driving here that, that's the visual signal you're looking for, not the sign. So the second thing I want to talk about today is appliances and power, which you wouldn't think would be any different than anywhere else in the world, but it is. I noticed straight away that one of the first things I purchased when I arrived in the US was a vacuum cleaner, and I happened to buy the same model that I owned when I was living in London, England. So I got my sexy maid's uniform on and started vacuuming, and immediately thought, what's wrong with this vacuum cleaner? It has no suck. And I wasn't imagining things. Turns out, the vacuum, even though it is exactly the same model vacuum cleaner I had in Europe, it had far less power to it. And that is the case for all manner of appliances here in the US. And there is a reason for this. The reason is that here in the US, they use the 120 volt system. It's 120 volts and it supplies 15 amps. So to get the wattage, the maximum wattage, you times 120 by 15, you get about 1800 watts of permissible power from an outlet. Most other parts of the world use the 240 volt system at 10 amps. So you times 240 by 10 amps, you get 2,400 watts of power. But that's not the whole story. Here in the US, they wire houses a little differently as well. So they wire per room instead of by type. So they don't split lights from appliance sockets. Everything's just bundled into one. So if you blow a fuse or a circuit breaker here, you just lose that whole room, lights and everything. And because of this, they tend to limit the wattage that can be used out of an outlet to about 1,500 watts. So pretty much everything that uses power has this limit of wattage to 1,500 watts. Whether it's washing machines or kettles, toasters, power tools, vacuum cleaners, giant rabbit vibrators, everything is less powerful than what I'm used to in other countries. Because the 1,500 watt maximum is 30 or 40% less than the 2,400 watt maximum that appliances can use elsewhere in the world. So there have been efforts to try and address this problem. There is a different type of power outlet that you see specifically in commercial buildings where the outlet looks a little different. It's got a little T on it. And when it's got a little T on that outlet, it means this outlet is wired to 20 amps. So if you take 120 volts by 20 amps, you get 2,400 watts, the same as everywhere else. Unfortunately, no one really makes appliances for these outlets, so it hasn't really become commonplace. So that's the first of my observations about living here in the US. If you guys have got any suggestions as to what you'd like me to talk about with regards to living here, put them in the comments below. I'd be more than happy to answer them. Anyway, William and I thank you for watching as always, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye then.